I'll be running this evening's webinar, which unsurprisingly is all about how to write an effective CV and LinkedIn profile. Got a lot to cover this evening, so it'll be quite a fast-paced amount of content, a lot of stuff heading in your general direction. Consequently, in dealing with questions, the most efficient and fair way is for you to type them into the facility you have on your GoToWebinar toolbar at any time you like. So as soon as something enters your head and you want an answer, rattle it into the facility you've got. At the end of the session, I'll let you know when we've done. For those that need to disappear, you can. For those who want to listen to the answers to their or other people's questions, you're more than welcome to hang on. Normally, I answer everybody's questions, so I will attempt to do so. I don't think there'll be so many people that that won't be possible. But as I say, I'll remind you of that towards the end of the session. It's an audio one-way only broadcast, so you should be able to hear me. That seems to be working fine, and you should be able to see some slides on the screen. Currently an opening slide with my photo and my virtual colleague on the screen. I can't hear or see you, however loud you shout or frantically you wave. Your webcams and microphones are disabled centrally. So let's kick off and talk a little bit about CVs and how you make the best of them. Firstly, to explain who on earth we are, the CV and Interview Advisors is a company. It exists to provide individuals, businesses with CV advice, LinkedIn advice, and career guidance, interview coaching and such like. The reason I mention that is to try and give you a bit of confidence that we know what we're talking about. I haven't just woken up one day thinking it would be a good idea to spend a Thursday night talking to people across the ether about CV ideas that are not practiced or have any relevance in the marketplace. More of that later, hopefully. And also, not wanting to big myself up, but just to, again, hopefully give you some confidence. I've worked both as an employer, recruiting people through the usual traditional channels, as a recruiter, both within the permanent and contract market, and more recently, of course, with this business where I review CVs, probably reviewed knocking on for 10,000 now, I guess, and written a fair few as well. So the main message behind that is that we see, together with my colleagues, enough of what's going on in the marketplace, not just in the UK, but across Europe, America, Australasia, Far East, to know what works and what doesn't work. There's going to be a number of cliches flying around this evening, I'm afraid, hot skills being one of them, and the first. It's really important that you, if you're going to produce a good CV, that you know what the hot skills in your marketplace are. They change and evolve over time. What was popular and hot and sexy 10 years ago, 5 years ago, isn't necessarily so now, particularly if you're in change environments like IT, project management, even finance and accounting to some degrees. So many new rules and regulations, laws, systems, hardware, software. If you don't keep up with the times and make reference to those things in your CV, you'll be on the back foot. So that's really important, and one of the messages to take away from this evening. Bottom line is we produce documents. Still the core of our activity is writing CVs, but increasingly it's also getting people's LinkedIn profiles sorted that really drive people's success in the job market. How do we know it really works? Well, I guess, you know, if you're harsh about it, we wouldn't be in business if we weren't putting into practice stuff that people felt they were getting value for money for. But here's a quote from an email we got February. I was going to say last month, but we've clicked into April now, quite recently. This is a person who attended one of our webinars earlier in the year, really struggling in the marketplace, really struggling. I mean, a really good individual, perfectly good set of skills. They weren't some kind of crazed mad axe murderer or an employable person, but they had an atrocious CV. I mean, it really was bad. It didn't get across the message about what they had to offer at all. And the really sad thing was nobody had told them. In 3 years of looking for new opportunities, nobody had sat down and said to this person, you're not getting interviews because your CV's a pile of rubbish, which it was. consequently, that person just kept banging up against the brick wall, trying to get interest, not wondering what on earth the problem was. Took it all very personally, of course, as most people do. But finally, attended one of our webinars. We were able to help them, got the CV sorted and the LinkedIn profile. All of a sudden, literally overnight, that dramatic, started getting interest attention, as you can see from the quote on screen. So it can be quite a dramatic turnaround, just from following a few simple steps that we're going to talk about this evening. Now, what quite a lot of people tend to ask us or are interested in is whether by sorting the CV out, however you go about that, but if you go to market with a CV that's better than the one you currently have got, will it make a difference? And the answer is absolutely yes, as long as you're applying for jobs that are relevant and appropriate. So, although it's a bit of a crazy example, if you're a supermarket checkout operator and you're trying to be a nuclear submarine captain, it doesn't matter who writes your CV, that ain't going to happen anytime soon, of course. But if you're an accountant and you want to be a senior accountant, you're a salesperson, you want to be an account manager, you're a project manager, you want to be a program manager, you're a developer and you want to be a senior developer, those kind of logical moves, either like for like or stretching a little bit, if you're applying for those kind of jobs and you want to get more success at getting interviews for those kind of jobs, based on our stats, what we see coming back from our audience, you can get a very substantial double-digit increase in success rate of getting interviews, and on average it's a 30 to 50% uplift, hence the comment at the bottom of this slide. So it is worth taking action. But it is important to figure out what your CV might be capable of right now before you jump into doing anything. So a little bit of this evening is about performing some self-diagnostic checks. So I'd like you to ask yourself some questions about your own CV, and that will help you figure out whether it's up for the job. And it will be really easy if you're currently active in the job market or have been active quite recently. But I'll also give some hints and tips so that if you're about to get into the job market, or if you're in the job market anytime soon, you'll be able to reflect on this and work out whether you've got a document that's going to perform or not, and then you can decide to do something. So the first warning sign, thinking about your own CVs right now, if you're effectively going to market with just a list of things, so the jobs that you've done, the employers that you've worked for, the qualifications you've got, how people should contact you, hobbies and interests, and they're just listed like that, that's a warning sign. The reason why it's a warning sign is just think of anything that you've bought recently: car, house, domestic appliance, boat if you're lucky enough. It's highly unlikely you will have bought any of those things purely based on a list of things that somebody presented to you. You're not going to go out and buy a car or be persuaded to buy a car based on the fact that it's a couple of meters wide, 5 meters long and 1.5 meters tall. That's just not going to float anybody's boat. What you're going to have done is you're going to be persuaded by advertisements, salespeople, messages, websites, brochures, features and benefits that relate to you and resonate with you for your own particular needs, and then you make a purchasing decision. It's a whole lot of emotive things as well as facts and figures, but presented in terms of how they benefit you or might benefit you. You have to treat yourself as the same, or in the same way. You are a product or service into a marketplace that has a problem that needs solving. You as an employee could be the solution to that problem, and so you have to position yourself, you have to promote yourself in that way. And so to a recruiter or an employer, if all you're doing is sending them a list of things and you're hoping that by some magic process they'll guess how good you are as a candidate, that ain't going to happen. The market's just gone way beyond that. Second warning sign, if you're, doesn't matter how long you've been out of education, but if in effect you have a CV that you started constructing when you left school, college, university, and all you've done is add to it over time, maybe edited it a little bit, removed some of the older career, but essentially you've still got the same structure, that is a warning sign, particularly if you have got a career more than 10 years long, because that format of CV will be totally ineffective. I won't say that wouldn't get any interviews, but you won't be as effective as you should be. These infamous hot skills again. if you're not aligning your CV to what the market is actually expecting, guess what? You won't be as successful as you might like. Again, I couldn't say that you won't get interviews, you just won't get as many for the jobs that you'd like. It's a really competitive marketplace out there. Recruiters and employers believe, whether it's right or wrong, they believe they have the luxury of choice still in most marketplaces. Consequently, they're going to receive lots of applications. They're going to believe that somewhere in that pile of applications the right person exists. If your CV doesn't actually appear to be that right person, it will get rejected very swiftly, which is why knowing what those hot skills are and building your CV around them is really important. We'll touch on this later and I'll show you some real-life examples. Another cliche, second one of the evening, target audience. Linked to what I just said about hot skills, your target audience, some people are not really clear on this, but your target audience is a mixture of people, of course. It's a recruiter, potentially. It's an employer or the decision maker or the hiring manager within that employer. And it could be a whole bunch of intermediaries, HR, outsourced recruitment folk, or third-party HR consultants, or any combination of those type of folk. All of them will have their own view on what represents the ideal candidate. Hopefully, that view will be fairly common for each position, but it's not necessarily always the case. And you have to make sure that you get inside their mind and think, what are these people really looking for? And in an ideal world, you're crafting your CV to resonate with those people, your target audience. So they pick up the CV or look at it on the screen and think, this person looks valid, relevant, and interesting, not just another candidate. Again, we'll talk a bit about how to do that very soon. Bottom line from where we are, and third cliche of this evening, and probably the strongest message you should take away from this evening, bar none, is that your CV needs to present to the target audience a business case, a strong business case as to why they should even consider interviewing you. So going back to my comment about buying the car, the boat, the domestic appliance, you won't have bought something purely based on a list or often on a whim, not for those kind of monies involved. You'll have bought it because somehow either somebody or you calculated in your mind that it was worth doing. There was a strong reason to do it. If you have ever had to go to your employer to justify an investment or to request money to buy something, you have to make a business case as to why you're going to do that. And it's the same these days for the recruitment process. You're having to justify to somebody, you might not know who that person is, but you're having to justify why they should consider interviewing you, much less actually hire you, that comes later. But in the early stages of the application process, why on earth should they be considering interviewing you? Bearing in mind that most of your target audience will be thinking they do have the luxury of choice. There are more people available than they actually need by a factor of many tens sometimes, if not hundreds. So unsurprisingly, a bad CV is just a list of stuff. So if you have just got a list of things, your employers, the job titles, the dates, duties, responsibilities, hobbies and interests, that's not differentiating yourself. You're just going to be looking, or will be looking like pretty much every other candidate in the marketplace. You will not stand out. Your chances of getting selected and shortlisted for interview are less than they would ordinarily be. A good CV is one that presents a strong business case to the same target audience, which in effect makes their job a whole lot easier because you'll be saying on the CV, here I am, this is me, I have got the skills you're looking for that are relevant to the marketplace, and here's the evidence to prove it. And that's why typically a well-written CV will get you 30 to 50% more interviews than you would otherwise get. Sometimes it's dramatically more than that, but the average is in that 30 to 50% range. It can be that dramatic, that big a difference. Okay, final fact on assessing whether your CV is up to the job or not. If you've been or are currently active in the market with your CV right now, there's one statistic that rules all others as to whether your CV is any good or not. And that is how many interviews you're getting, basically. So if let's imagine you're applying for 10 jobs, and let's assume those 10 jobs are relevant, i.e. you're not looking to be the nuclear submarine captain that I joked about earlier. You're genuinely looking to do jobs that you know you could perform, or you believe you could perform based on the evidence at your disposal. And out of those 10 jobs, if you get 8, 9, 10 interviews, then of course that would suggest your CV is very effective. It's getting you in front of the people you want to be in front of for jobs that you're interested in more often than not. Therefore, your CV is absolutely fine. If, however, you're not getting any interviews at all, or you're only getting 1 or 2 interviews, and by interview I mean an interview with a decision maker, somebody who can progress your application for that specific job, not a recruiter who's just fishing, looking at people, and you're not actually being seriously considered for the position. So random ad hoc interviews with recruiters don't count. They have to be interviews for positions that you understand and know about, and ideally with somebody who can make an actual positive decision about whether you progress to the next stage. So obviously if you're not getting many interviews, a lot of people get confused and they think, well, it's the marketplace, you know, it's been tough, economic climate. No, that's not the reason. If the job's there and you've applied for it, it exists, and you should be considered along with everybody else. If you're as valid an applicant, you stand as good a chance as getting an interview. A lot of people say, yeah, but there were lots of other people applying for the job. Absolutely true. A valid reason, but not a valid reason for not getting an interview. It doesn't matter how many applicants for the job. If you're a relevant, valid candidate, you should be getting interviews for that job. What it points to 99.9 times out of 100 is a poor CV. If you're not getting interviews, it's got very little to do with economic climate or the number of applicants for the job. What it's got everything to do with is somebody somewhere doesn't like the message you've sent them. Whatever you've sent on your application form or CV, and as we'll see later, LinkedIn profile, somebody's not liking, and they're not liking it enough to decide that's it, we're not going to bother. And individuals take this personally and think, oh, you know, am I really good enough for the marketplace, blah, 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 and it's not a personal thing. Nobody knows you from Adam in most cases. The recruiter doesn't know who you are. The employer probably almost certainly doesn't know who you are. All they can judge you on is what you've sent them. So if you've sent them rubbish, inappropriate, irrelevant rubbish, and I know that's harsh, but if that's true, and a lot of employers will say that to the recruiter, you'll not hear about it, but I guarantee the comment will be made. If people have perceived what you've sent them to be inappropriate, that's why you don't get interviews. And that doesn't often get reported back. So that's the key ratio. So if you've been active in the market or you're active in the market, you've got the stats, you can work it out, you can decide whether there's something that needs to be done. If you're about to go into the market at some stage in the future, keep an eye on that statistic, because that's critical. And if you have a problem, guess what? You probably should do something about it. That quote that I showed you earlier of the individual who'd spent 3 years trying to get interest to progress up the career ladder, that's not untypical, I'm afraid. It's a bit of an extreme, but it's not untypical. And because nobody had bothered to tell this individual that their CV was atrocious, they thought and were persuaded by these vague comments about it being a competitive marketplace, lots of other people better qualified for the role. He was either underqualified or overqualified, depending on who he spoke with. All of those seem to be valid reasons as to why he didn't get interviews. They're plausible explanations, but they're not the truth. The harsh reality was everybody who picked up his CV before him getting it sorted didn't like the message. It didn't fit their requirements, and it wasn't anywhere close to fitting their requirements. The only reason he would have got an interview with his old CV was if the market existed of only one person, which had been him. That's how bad it was. So a very strong message you should take away from this evening is that if you have got a problem, don't listen to the reasons that don't make any sense. If you're not getting interviews, it's because somebody doesn't like the message you're sending them. You can change that message. The skills you've got, the experience that you've got are valuable. They can be probably better articulated than you're currently going to market with. That's the bit that changes, and that's the bit that makes the difference. So fix it. And you have effectively 2 options. You either fix it yourself or you get professional help. We'll talk more about that later. So that's what to do with your current CV. Those are the kind of things to watch out for. So the key messages there is make sure your CV is making a strong business case to whoever you're sending it to. That business case will be different for different opportunities, so you need to flex it. But at its core, the proposition should be make a strong business case to your target audience as to why they should interview you. And always remember, the CV's job is to get you the interview, not the job. Getting the job is a whole set of other issues, including interviews and assessment centres. So the CV's job is to get the interview. Making a strong business case will increase the chances of getting interviews and the number of interviews you get. And that if you're not getting interviews right now, the issue is the CV and the quality of the CV and almost nothing else for most people. And if you have a problem, therefore, you need to do something about it. And sitting back and not doing anything about it and imagining things will change is not a clever course of action. So on to what represents a good CV and how you should go about making the changes. Well, what you see on screen now is a structure of what I would recommend is an effective CV structure. It doesn't mean to say you have to copy this verbatim, and certainly what's on the screen at the moment are only the sections of a CV that make sense and flow in a nice logical fashion. We're going to go through each of these in turn. We're going to spend more attention on the top three. And the reason why we're going to do that is because if you get those three sections right, that forms the key part of your business case. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that you get these bits right and you'll already be in the pile marked maybe or definitely we need to interview, or somebody will already have picked up the phone or sent you an email saying, when can we meet, tell me more, or whatever. So there's a lot of things on a CV typically, but the three most important parts are highlighted now, and as I say, they form the business case as to why somebody should interview you. With these sections, we'll go into each of them, as I say, one by one. What you call the sections, whether you have the sections in quite the same order that I've described, in a way, doesn't really matter. The content is absolutely key. So where most people go wrong with their CV is the actual content. The bit that people are interested in is so far wide of the mark, it's harming their chances of getting interviews. So let's deal with the first of those sections first, the opening statement. So many of you will have, again, think about your own CV, many of you will have some kind of opening statement. You might call it a personal profile, a professional profile, a personal summary, an executive summary. It doesn't really matter what you call it within reason. What's really important is what follows, the content, the actual text. And it's the first part of building an effective business case as to why somebody should interview you. Now, I'll explain a little bit more later what you shouldn't be doing, but unfortunately what most people tend to do on your CV, and whether you do this or not will ring true pretty soon. First, I'll explain what you should be doing in this opening statement. And that, which some people are surprised by, the first thing you need to do is explain what you actually are. So most people don't do this on their CV. They assume that the recruiter or hiring manager will read the CV at length, give it lots and lots of time, work down to the career history or work experience section, figure out that you've got a particular job title with a particular company, and that automatically somehow somebody will magically understand what that all means in the same way that you know what it means. And I'm afraid virtually none of that happens. So if you're applying for a job with a specific title, or and when I say specific, I mean a generic title, so yes, salesperson, business development manager, accountant, finance director, IT controller, developer, project manager, anything generic like that, state that. If that's your core skill set, it doesn't matter what your precise title is, but if you're going for that kind of job and you can legitimately call yourself that, the very first thing you need to be saying on the CV is, in effect, you are what the recruiter or employer is actually looking for. I'll show you an example very soon. And I will also be showing you shortly a real-life CV where this is all incorporated. Second thing is, and where are we on cliches? Number 4th, I think, value proposition. You need to be demonstrating to your target audience, in effect, what is your worth? Why are you on this planet right now doing what you're doing? And what value have you to offer your potential new employer? So crudely, This is the place where if you're applying for a job that's got a salary of 35, 45, 55, 95,000 pound a year, or you're on a contract and it's a daily rate, whatever amount of money is involved, obviously the employer is looking for how you are going to offer a return on that investment. Your value proposition is a very big clue in terms of what return on their investment you're going to offer. I'll show you an example, as I say, shortly. But you need to give that flavour. You need to give some indication that you can offer a return on the investment in salary or daily rate or whatever. You then link that to things that you're particularly good at. Most people, irrespective of length of experience and job, have 3, 4, maybe 5 really core things that they're good at or that they can demonstrate an ability towards. You need to hint at that. And of course, that needs to be aligned to these hot skills that I keep going on about. So in a nutshell, the very first statement that anybody reads on your CV, apart from who on earth you are, is almost a reflection of what they're looking for in an ideal world. Now, some people can get close to that and others, and you need to be truthful and honest, of course, about this. But you need to be basically saying to a recruiter who might be looking for a particular job title with a particular set of skills and a particular set of experience at a sort of macro level, you need to be reflecting in this opening statement exactly what they're looking for if you can justify it. This helps differentiate you from all of the other people who have applied, a great chunk of which have got this spectacularly wrong for reasons I'll come on to in a minute, but also who are totally irrelevant for the job. We invited a consultant from Michael Page the other day onto one of these webinars to do a bit of a live sort of intro and frustrations of a recruiter and how the recruiters see the CV. And whatever your view of recruiters is, he had some really interesting insight. And for one job, it was a senior finance job, finance director role actually, they had 15, in the UK, had 1,500 applicants for. It's a fairly senior job, not many finance directors in the great scheme of things in the world who are currently looking to move, or in the UK I should say. 1,500 applicants. Of that, around I think 20-25% were complete time wasters, i.e. there was a welder, there was a housewife with no experience, and I think there was a teacher or something applying. Now, I don't mean a derogatory comment to any of those professions, but they had no reason or justification for applying for that job, but they had to be dealt with, and they clog up the system. And it's another piece of paper that the recruiter has to look at and make a decision about. So if your CV doesn't get across the validity and relevance of your position and that you are a valid candidate for that role, guess what? It's dead easy for the recruiter to cast you aside. And bear in mind, they'll probably give you about 5 to 20 seconds during this first filtering stages. If you've got to deal with 1,500 applicants, you don't get much time. All the recruiter's thinking of doing is, I need to get this down to 10 people I might look at more seriously, 3 to 5 that I might interview. That's an awful lot of people going to get rejected. If your CV doesn't get your business case across pretty quickly, you'll be rejected simply because they don't have the time to make a big conscious decision about you. You won't get that luxury. I promise you an example. Interestingly, it's actually for a finance director, although there's no connection with the story I just relayed. I won't read this verbatim. Look at it yourself. Ask yourself, if I have an opening statement at the top of my CV, ignore the level of the role and the detail, but this sentiment, is this anywhere close to what you've got on your CV? So, what are you? Well, this person is an experienced finance director. That's what they are. Tick. What's their value proposition? Well, it's a bit about financial governance, protecting cash flow and profitability. Tick. What are they particularly good at? There's a list of things which they've started. Key strengths include, and they've listed stuff that they're good at. So that's a tick. Are they aligned with the hot skills in the marketplace? Well, we have to assume so because we don't know the individual or the job concerned, but it seems that way. So again, tick. Now, what you'll notice, there is nothing behavioural in there. So what people tend to get hideously wrong in their on their CVs currently, and you'll know if this is true of you yourself, I guarantee at least 3/4 of the people on this evening will have something, if they've got an opening statement, they'll have something that talks about enthusiasm, dedication, commitment, passion, dynamism, giving 110%, working in a team or as an individual, interpersonal skills, all of those kind of behavioural traits, all admirable skills for the job, totally useless in terms of getting interviews. Why? Because you can't prove any of those things. If you can prove how enthusiastic you are on a piece of paper, well then good luck to you. If you can persuade a recruiter without speaking to them that you are 10% more enthusiastic than any other applicant, good luck to you. And whether they'd actually believe you or not, super good luck to you. Those things don't happen. So anything behavioural, any of those skills that can't be proven on your CV later on are useless. They add no value at all and are highly likely to get you rejected because the recruiter's just thinking, here we go again, same old, somebody who's copied this off the internet or not updated their CV or is just not aware of what the key skills are in the marketplace, reject. And they'll reject you before reading anything else because they don't have the time to give you consideration. What they're looking for are the people who've taken the time to think, what am I, what's my value proposition, in effect, what's the business case as to why you should be looking to interview me, and then they'll read a bit further. So it's really important, this opening statement. So that's the first section. So out of the 3 sections I mentioned to build a really strong business case, this is the first one. Wouldn't say necessarily the most important, but it is important because, of course, you're setting the scene, and you can lose interview opportunities by getting this spectacularly wrong. Before I show you a real-life example, we'll just go through the second of the 3 sections, and that's an area that we call key skills or key areas of expertise or expertise. Doesn't really matter, again, what you call it. It's the content that's absolutely vital. And the issue here is that what you're trying to do is reflect technical and functional skills that are being sought by the recruiter, or more particularly the employer via the recruiter, that you know you possess. And this works well at 2 levels. First of all, aesthetically it looks good because it's providing the reader with confirmation of certain skills that they are looking for that you have, and if you get them right, it just again makes people feel comfortable that you're the right kind of person for the job. So aesthetically it works well because as soon as somebody sees the CV, they're seeing reflected back to them skills that they know that they've been asked to look for in each individual. The second more subtle reason why this is a good section to have is because if you get this right and populate this area of the CV with the right skills, words and phrases, digitally your CV will be found more often than not for the kind of positions that you're interested in. So when people are searching on the various databases that your CV will hit, you will appear more often. And all we're looking to do here is just provide bullet points, 2, 3, 4 words tops normally, of key technical or functional skills that you possess that could be reflected back that are relevant to the target audience. So you don't just list random stuff, you list stuff that is relevant to the job that you're applying for. Again, I'll show you an example shortly to show you how it all fits together, but it's really important, again, if you get this right, it's just reaffirming to the reader that you're the valid applicant or a valid applicant for the role. Now the comment at the bottom of this screen is also quite important, and it's very obvious at first glance, and that is the vast majority of recruiters and hiring managers make their shortlisting decisions based solely on the contents of your CV. Now most people, if you told them that, you'd think, well of course, that big deal, why even mention that, how else are they going to do it? But that is the message. What we tend to find when we're talking to individuals who come to us for help, or we're giving advice to, is that they'll often say, we'll say something like, okay, well, why is this not on your CV? Why haven't you mentioned this particular gem? And they'll say, yeah, but I'd interview, I'd mention it. Well, why haven't you given evidence of this thing that you've just explained to me that's a really strong achievement? Yeah, I do that. I do that interview. How many interviews have you had in the last 3 months? None. And that's the thing. Most people, for some strange reason, imagine that the recruiter or hiring manager has got a crystal ball that they can look into, and that whatever you've put on their CV and however obscure you've been, they will somehow see through all of that, look into the crystal ball, knit it all together, and come up with this perfect image of you as a candidate, and automatically see your worth. And as you probably gathered by now, that just doesn't happen. No such crystal ball exists. you will be judged purely on what you've sent somebody. If you've sent somebody a whole heap of rubbish, then you'll be judged as such. Now, you'll know this if you're getting interviews, and enough interviews for you to be happy and to convert into second interviews and assessment centres or job offers. It doesn't matter what your CV looks like, it's obviously doing its job. But if you're stuck and you're not getting enough interviews to get beyond, it's probably because whatever you're sending people is not compelling them to do anything. They're looking at you, judging you harshly. You've got 5 to 20 seconds of their time initially. If you haven't won them over in that time, you'll be rejected. And they may never get to find out where you work, much less trying to imagine the good things that you've been up to. So, really important that you get across a strong message and build this business case. Let me show you, as promised, a real-life CV with some of these sections that we've talked about. So on the screen right now, gradually, is Matt's the guy that runs our business. This is a real-life CV. It's his information. Doesn't matter what level you're at. In fact, I should point out, if you've just graduated, we often get a few recent graduates on, or people with very little commercial experience. Don't imagine that you have to have experience to get these messages right. You don't. You just have to tweak the content. What I've talked about so far, the professional summary, that opening statement, which you can see at the top of the page right now, and then the bullet-pointed skills or areas of expertise, that can be written for anybody, anywhere, at any level, with any level of experience, anywhere in the world. It matters not whatever level of experience or inexperience you have. You can always write something like this. You just have to tweak it for your environment and what you have got in your toolkit of skills. So you can see there's nothing radical about the layout. That's not what it's about. It's building the business case as to why somebody should be interested in hiring or interviewing, I should say, Matt. So he's describing what he is, what he does, what his value proposition is, linking it to hot skills in his marketplace, and then he's bullet pointing some key skills, technical and functional skills that he has, and pretty much anything in that top two sections could be proven later on in the CV. It's not to say you have to prove everything, but a good question to ask yourself of anything you put on your CV, can you actually prove it by way of example later on in the CV? And certainly, can you prove it at interview, first interview? And if you can't prove those things, absolutely guarantee prove them, they probably shouldn't be on the CV, with very few exceptions. Number of bullet points, Matt's probably got the maximum we'd recommend ordinarily. I mean, it's not a huge issue, but obviously if you only put a couple of bullet points, it looks pathetic. If you put 42, it looks ridiculous. So somewhere between 10 and 14 bullet points, equally balanced, left and right hand side of the page is where you need to be at. But, and here's the thing, pick relevant examples. Don't just list a whole load of random stuff. A lot of people go to market, and the first mistake they make is, again, they replicate behavioural skills. So you don't want enthusiasm, you don't want dedication, passion, commitment. That's rubbish for the CV. It's not to say those skills aren't important, but you can't prove them on the CV, so don't put them on the CV. And a lot of people get confused because they think, yeah, but the employer or recruiter has said that they're looking for people with enthusiasm. It's on the job description, it's on the advertisement. And that's true, but putting them on your CV is not going to get you an interview. The detail, the bit that you can't see often, is that the recruiter or employer has got a matrix. And yes, they'll have skills that are desirable or essential. They'll have skills that are maybe compromisable areas. So if somebody hasn't got it, but they're the right kind of person, we might consider them. They'll have a matrix also of where those skills are going to be assessed. So things like enthusiasm, commitment, team working, presentation skills, interpersonal skills, whilst they're important, they'll be judged and be marked as such to be judged at interview stage and beyond, assessment centres, etc. Not, we will look at the CV for enthusiasm and make a decision based on the CV contents. What the CV will be looked at is this person a valid applicant? Is there evidence to support the fact that technically they would seem to have the skills able to do the job? And is there any evidence to prove that they've got experience in the areas that we're interested in? And most people get that hideously wrong, which is why people don't get the interviews they expect. So, okay, that's Matt's CV. We'll come back to that shortly. Let's just take a look now at the third section of the three that I was going to spend most time on, which is what we call career highlights. You could call these achievements if you liked. Again, it doesn't really matter what you call the section. It's the content that's absolutely critical, and particularly in this area. And this is another area where you probably need to start thinking. If you're thinking, first of all, my CV needs sorting out, or I'm going to have to do something. If you're not very good at writing about yourself, if you're not very good at assessing what skills you have and how to articulate those and your achievements on paper, so to speak, or on screen, don't fight that. Just accept you're not very good at it, just as you wouldn't go fix your own car necessarily, or your own plumbing, or landscape your garden, unless you're particularly interested in those sorts of things. Get help, get somebody to do it. We'll touch on that later. But don't waste time doing something you're not very good at. We use a methodology to construct these career highlights called STAR. It's not unique to us. There's plenty of people use this acronym or something very similar to it, and you may know of other examples. But for our purposes, STAR stands for Situation, Task, Actions, and Result, and it's a really nifty way of compartmentalizing fairly complex events in your life, projects, achievements, assignments, deconstructing them and then rewriting them in a concise manner. It's very useful for writing things on your CV. It's very useful if you can perfect the methodology or get good at it anyway and practice it. Really useful way of dealing with competency-based questions at interview. So, I'll give you an example and then I'll talk you through how it was constructed. So this is something we put on the CV. This actually has come off Matt's CV. That's a real-life example. Again, you can read the content yourself, but the sections are something like this. So the opening sentence starting ERAC, that ERAC stands for Enterprise Rent-A-Car, so most people will be familiar with that company, big car rental group. So they acquired an unprofitable competitor that needed sorting out. That's the situation, the scene setter, if you like, the headline. What was this all about? So anybody reading that will think, okay, understand that. Yeah, I might not know the detail, don't need to know, but I can understand what we're talking about now. The task is the responsibility resting on Matt's shoulder at that particular moment in time. So he was appointed operations manager basically to sort out the business. So we know what Matt's role was in this situation. The bulk of the remaining text, starting performed, top to bottom review, are the actions that Matt took as operations manager, ideally in chronological order, nice logical flow. And then the result is the final sentence, where you can see he succeeded in rebranding the business, achieved a certain level of profitability within a certain time scale. Now, he could probably write a book on this subject if he wanted to. Might not be a very interesting book in fairness, but he could write a book. Nobody's going to be interested in reading that kind of quantity of content. If you get this right, there's a real balance to be struck between enough information for people to understand what on earth you're going on about and to assess its value and relevance to their needs, but not so much that you send them to the top of the tall cliff. Really important to get that balance right. Probably there's lots of questions that could flow out of this, but that's not the point. It's examples. It's real-life evidence of the skills that Matt's previously claimed to have had on his CV in the opening statement and the bullet-pointed key skills. It's an example of where he's actually delivered those skills. There's virtually nobody else on the planet who could claim to offer the same experience because it is almost unique. Some people may have done similar things, but nobody could copy and paste that on their CV. Now, although it's not an exact parallel, remember I talked about your opening statements, and if you've got this kind of, I'm a team player, enthusiastic, committed, I'm dynamic, give 110%. My acid test for those kind of statements, and what a lot of people write as their achievements or highlights in their jobs, if you can copy and paste it and stick it under somebody else's name on a different CV and it still makes sense, then obviously that's got to be wrong. And most people's CVs that I see, you can take great chunks of content and I could stick it under my name and I could still justify what has been said, and that has to be wrong. That's not differentiating you in any way, shape or form. So if you could look at your CV now and take any chunks of it and put it under the name of a friend of yours or somebody at work who's doing a similar job, and they could logically still say, yeah, that's a fairly good summary of me and what I get up to, that's a hideous warning sign that something's wrong, because that's how you'll appear to a recruiter or employer, just a same old Me Too kind of offering. Whereas if you start putting this stuff on your CV, these kind of career highlights, you're differentiating yourself. Not only are you giving people specific, unique examples, you're giving them real hard evidence of your ability to do something. But you have to be a bit careful with these highlights, because lots of people have achievements on their CV. They might not have mentioned that they're highlights, and they may not put them in the same place on their CV as we would recommend, but most people tend to have some kind of achievement. But a lot of people pick weak or irrelevant examples. If you pick weak examples, it just looks like you failed, basically. It just is a horrible psychological thing. So think really long and hard about any examples that you pick. Are they relevant to your target audience? And it's important for a number of reasons. It's just about if you're in IT and one of your biggest achievements is when you launched Windows 95 into a number of desktop machines. That has very little relevance in today's marketplace. I don't know of anybody who still uses Windows 95, and there may be even some people on tonight who've never even heard of Windows 95. But it's something that would harm your chances of getting interviewed. Do not necessarily pick the examples that you felt most comfortable with, or you were most impressed with, or you enjoyed the most in your career, because they're not necessarily what is relevant to your target audience. So really consider what you put on the CV. Don't just put random stuff down thinking job done. Matt's example was quite powerful in the sense that he achieved quite a high level of profitability with a nice number attached to it within a fairly tight timescale. You don't have to have that. If you're in a fairly administrative kind of job, you're a small cog on a big wheel, don't feel that you have to describe world-changing events, or that you should feel lesser about yourself because you haven't changed the world in some magical way. That's not the point. The point is to give good, relevant examples to back up claims that you're making on your CV for a specific job that you're targeting. And so everybody can pick examples, and I would stress, even if you've just graduated or have very little work experience, you just flick this around, and rather than it being a career highlight, you look for proof of competencies. Now, a graduate recruiter might be looking for proof of an ability to manage a project, or to organize things, or to deal with people in a certain way. And if you've ever worked in, for example, a part-time retail job or a restaurant or something, that would have taught you how to organize things, how to deal with people, how to handle conflict, how to resolve conflict, how to handle money. Any of those competencies then can be extrapolated and put on the CV. And they start to differentiate you and start to prove why somebody should be interested in you. So I stress, anybody at any level with any level of experience can write better content for their CV. You just have to think about what that content is and the relevance for your audience. When we're writing CVs for our clients, this is where we spend most of the time, because most people are fairly modest normally. Not everybody, but most people are fairly modest. A lot of people forget about the good stuff they've done, or they undervalue it, or they just genuinely, they don't know what the target audience is looking for. They've got all these examples, and they're not sure which ones they should put on their CV. You can't put everything, because otherwise your CV would be very long, potentially. But it's which ones to choose. And that's where we can really add some value. Okay, before we look at other sections of the CV, let me show you Matt's CV again. And just a quick reminder as well, I've seen quite a few questions appear already, but if anybody wants to ask questions, rattle them into your GoToWebinar facility as they come to you, and then at the end of the session, I'll come back and answer them all. Okay, so we've just talked about the three sections that form the business case, or the vast majority of the business case on your CV. Now, there you are in order. The opening summary, talked about that. The bullet points, talked about that. And then the career highlights, and you'll see those on screen now on Matt's CV. I showed you the middle one, the enterprise rent-a-car example. We talked through that using the STAR methodology. Now you'll notice on Matt's CV there are 3 examples. That's deliberate, really. It's enough, again, to give variety. We're not expecting, we don't know, truth be told, whether people read every single last detail or not. That's not really the point. The point is, anybody reading this CV, if Matt were applying for certain types of job, would fairly quickly assess that he's a valid person for those kind of jobs, would fairly quickly assess that he has the right technical and functional skills being sought for that job, and then if they were feeling nice and warm and cuddly about Matt, would start to see that there's actually some evidence to back up the claims he's made, which will make them even more warm and cuddly towards Matt. Whether they'd read all 3 highlights, 1 or 2, or any order. By then, the evidence suggests a lot of people will already have formed an opinion. Matt will have had his 5 to 20 seconds, probably a little bit more actually, in fairness. But whoever's making the decision about his process through the application, job application, will probably have come to a positive conclusion by now. Might have a flick through the rest of the CV, but have largely come to a positive decision. Conversely, if we'd got this hideously wrong, if it was a CV full of Me Too stuff, didn't differentiate, didn't give any evidence of Matt's abilities, he'd probably have been rejected by now. He's the same person, got the same skills and abilities, but the message that he's sending out to the trade and to employers and recruiters could be interpreted completely differently, simply by the way he's laid out his CV. Now you'll notice the other interesting thing is we've not yet mentioned where Matt has gained all this experience. There's nothing about where he's worked. So another warning sign, if you currently do this, if you open up your CV with either your education, irrespective of how long ago that was, or where you're currently working or have most recently worked, and that's almost the first thing that people's eyes will hit, that's a bad indicator. And the reason why it's a bad indicator is because there's no way you can build a business case by launching with your education. There are very few people whose education is so strong or unique that it's a differentiator. So there are hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of graduates out there, certainly thousands of 2-1 graduates, not many firsts, or not as many firsts, I guess. So just going to market using your education as a differentiator, the first thing you put on the CV is a non-starter for most people. Certainly going to market with who you're currently employed by or most recently employed by as the first thing on your CV by your name is a non-starter. It doesn't help, it doesn't differentiate you, whoever you work for. All it will do is let the reader of your CV conjure up an impression about you straight away without you giving them any build-up at all. You're not building a business case. This builds the business case before you get to who you're currently working for. We'll come on to that later. We'll just talk about those sections first and then we'll deal with it. Okay, so talked about the 3 sections that make up the business case. The remainder of the CV I'm going to spend less time on because it's less relevant in some regards. It's important, but it's not the key thing. It is important that you mention where on earth you've been working if you have a career history of any nature. It needs to be in reverse chronological order. Most people get that right. So you start with the most recent or current job, work backwards. But for anybody with a career more than roughly 10 years long, all you need to do is provide detail for the last roughly 8 to 10 years. When I say detail, I'll clarify that shortly. That's not to say that's all you put on the CV. You split the career into recent stuff and earlier stuff. And you spend very little time on the earlier stuff, as we'll shortly see. So you bit of detail about the last 8 to 10 years. People aren't interested what happened in the 1990s, the 1980s, the 1970s, or even for some people the 1960s. That has no relevance to you getting an interview. If you don't have a career that's more than 10 years, well, you don't need to worry about that. You just detail what you've got. But if you've worked in the 90s or even the early noughties now, don't bother detailing that at any length. It's not going to add value to your career, to your interview chances. I apologise. You provide a bit of background about each of these roles. Who on earth your company is. Don't assume people know who you work for, even if you work for a big brand. Don't ever make that assumption. because you might work for a particular division. There's lots of companies that have lots of subsectors, sister companies, odd divisions, or like Rolls-Royce, there's two Rolls-Royces, there's an aero engine bit and there's a car bit, two separate companies, completely separate parentage, they just share a brand name. If you just put Rolls-Royce on your CV, some people will think you're a jet engine person, some people will think you're into cars. That might affect whether you get an interview or not. You put a bit about your duties and responsibilities, the things you find on your job description, but you don't dump your job description into your CV or anything close to it, because if you do that, you just appear to be same as anybody else. A lot of people dump, they say, this is what I'm expected to do, this is what I'm paid to do, duties and responsibilities. And there's a massive list of them. Guess what? Anybody doing a similar job within a competitor of yours will have a similar list of things. Again, all you're going to market with is a list of stuff. It's not differentiating you. So focus on the achievements, the things you've done that justify why somebody should be interested in you. What have you done with those duties and responsibilities that makes you a little bit different? As regards the earlier career, so as I said, let's imagine you've got a career that goes back to the 90s. You provide detail for the last 8 to 10 years, roughly. It depends on the individual, but as a broad indicator, anything earlier than that, just one line. From this date to that date, employer, job title, end of. No need for any detail unless somebody had specifically asked you to provide it. Nobody's interested in what happened that long ago in terms of the detail, not for interview purposes. You then need to provide, of course, some evidence of the qualifications, continual professional development that you have received or gained in your life. Interestingly, that is towards the back of the CV. There are other ways of communicating whether you're a graduate, an MBA, Prince 2 qualified project manager, normally in the professional summaries. Remember that opening statement when we had the experienced finance director? If he'd been ACCA qualified, for those accountants amongst us tonight, then you could put an experienced ACCA qualified finance director, or an MBA educated finance director, or a graduate finance director. There are ways of incorporating a certain level of education or academic ability or professional qualification within statements at the front of the CV. You don't need to put the detail of your education at the front of the CV because, as I said earlier, it's not really a differentiator. Therefore, you can put all of the detail towards the back of the CV. Ditto personal details. Now, for the sharp-eyed amongst you, you'll have noticed on Matt's CV that I showed you, the first page is just his name and 2 contact numbers. You could exchange it, you could have his name, contact number, and an email, or any combination of. But there's no detail about where he lives, his marital status, his date of birth, his inside leg measurement. There's none of that. It's not necessary. It's not adding any value. In fact, there's some evidence to suggest that if you put your postcode and address on the front page of the CV, you may get rejected straight away simply because somebody's misinterpreted where you are, or assumed that you're not up to commuting that far. So you can never tell why people reject you, so don't give people information that might work against you. So we put all the personal details towards the back of the CV. And then the other strange and peculiar thing that people tend to put on their CV, references available on request. Well, we'd have to say, well, why on earth would you put references available on request? What does that mean? Well, it means, yes, you've got some references you give people. I have to tell you, you're not going to get an interview based on sticking the words references available on request on your CV. That's not going to make the blindest bit of difference whether you actually get an interview. If people want to take references, it will be much later on in the process, the recruitment process, and whether they're available on request or not matters not one iota. They will be asked for if they're needed, end of. So far more positively, put on your CV any testimonial evidence that you have, particularly if you've got a LinkedIn account, which we'll come on to very shortly. Pinch that recommendation stuff off LinkedIn and stick some of it on your CV, as long as it's from a reliable, powerful, reputable source. And then hobbies and interests are a bit controversial as well, or our view on these is lots of people put them on their CV. Our view would be if it helps build your business case, put them on. If it doesn't, take them off. Simple, really. If you've got a load of pursuits that you're interested in that could be perceived as being insular or introverted, is that helping you? Probably not. If you support a particular football team or club that could create an impression in the mind of the recruiter, or particularly the hiring manager, who supported, without you knowing it, the exact opposite. So Man City versus Man United, Liverpool v Everton, or anything of that ilk. You just don't want that little edge creeping in. Not that it should make the blindest bit of difference, but why volunteer something that might actually send a message to somebody that you don't want them to have? So the only exceptions to this really are where you could build your business case by mentioning a hobby or interest or a passion or enthusiasm for something that is relevant to your new career or career direction. So think hard about whether you include hobbies and interests on your CV. Okay, bit of general advice, and then I'll show you Matt's CV finally, and then we'll move on to LinkedIn. I'll go through all of these as time is tight now. Some of the important bits about writing a CV, it should be in the third person. There should be no references to you by name. There should be no references to you as I. It's just wrong. Hard to explain, just wrong. Spelling, really important. A good proportion of the CVs I still see day in, day out have spelling mistakes. In this current marketplace, and probably for the foreseeable future, it's an instant rejection for most recruiters and employers. It's so easy to justify rejecting somebody because of a spelling or grammatical error. So check, check, and check again. And a bit of an urban myth about number of pages for a CV. There is no rule of thumb, whatever you see floating around, unless you have been specifically asked to submit your document to a certain number of pages. Then there is no rule on this. You will not get rejected if you've sent a very high quality CV to somebody that happens to be on 4 pages. They might not read all of it, but they won't need to have done. They'll have made their decision earlier on. They're not going to not interview you because you've sent them 2 pages too many or 3 pages too many. And the only exception to that rule is where somebody has in advance said to you, only submit details on X number of pages. Most of the CVs we write for our clients are 3 pages long. Some are 4, some are 2, but most are 3. Never has anybody come back to us and said, you are a bunch of idiots, you have submitted a document to me which is 1 page longer than the market demands, I demand my money back. It's never happened. Nobody's ever complained about it. It's an urban myth, largely propagated because what people hate to get is rubbish on any number of pages. So how that's been misinterpreted is a bit like, we'll stop the rubbish by asking people or creating this impression that you should only submit a certain amount of information. 2 pages of rubbish is still 2 pages of rubbish. So it's content that's absolutely key. Okay, let's take a look at Matt's CV in terms of those other bits and pieces that we've talked about. Let me just reduce the size on screen. So what you should be seeing on screen now briefly is page 1 of Matt's CV. So we talked about the first 3 sections. Just down at the bottom of page 1 you'll see where we've brought in the career history. And what we're doing there is explaining who on earth Matt's worked for, his position, the dates, as you'd expect. Brief explanation about who on earth the company that Matt works for is, because most people will never have heard of it. We'd recommend doing that whoever you work for. A bit about what his role is. And then if we go on to page 2, a continuation of that. So obviously quite a lot of focus on his most recent role. It's a role he's performed for a number of years, so it justifies the space. It's the role that most people will be interested in because it's his current or most recent role. Most people are interested in that, so it gets more space. So there's a bit about his team, what he's there to do, what he's responsible for, the people he interacts with, but quite a lot of achievements or work that he's done to justify and to give examples of what he's capable of. Almost half and half, in fact. So a lot of fact, not just job description stuff, but scene setters, explanations, so people understand what he's about, but a lot of achievements, a lot of proof, a lot of evidence to back up what he's capable of. Then the bottom of page 2, an earlier role that he had, same format, who it is, title, dates, explanation, even though it's for a big company that most people probably have heard of this time, a bit of background, how did he fit in, what he was responsible for, what was his KPIs, and then on the third and final page of Matt's CV, the balance of one of his earlier roles, then his earlier career. See, that's just reduced to 1 line for each role. Notice also we picked out a career highlight earlier, Enterprise Rent-A-Car, remember that? That's from a time in Matt's life very early on in his career, a long time ago, what, about 15 years ago now, so actually almost 20 years ago. It doesn't matter, as long as something's still, if you can still pick out something relevant from your earlier career, although I said you don't provide the detail of your earlier career, if something relevant happened in that earlier part of your career, you can still make a career highlight out of it. And this is a really good way of escaping from that chronological pressure that a lot of people have. So folks sometimes write their CV and they put all the good stuff in the role that they really liked, but that was 10 years ago, and it's buried in the CV on page 2 or 3. Nobody will ever read it. So you can escape that. You can bring really good stuff, as long as it's relevant and appropriate, to the front of your CV, no matter when it happened. There's no chronological order to the career highlights. You put them in the order that you think your target audience will best respond. And then we've got Matt's education, so just highest level of education normally, his personal details, and then the recommendations. So there's 2 examples that you'd find on LinkedIn from people that testify to his abilities. Now, if you're in IT or arguably finance or any other technical realm, you could have another box in the CV with something like technical skills, and you could list all the technical skills, software skills, hardware skills, professional development if it were appropriate, that would help, again, build your business case. And if you're in IT particularly, people look for certain sort of skills. It's almost like tick box. You must have had certain experience of SAP or Oracle or certain platforms or certain racking systems or whatever. You could put those in some kind of box. Now, Matt's role's not about that, so there's no point in putting it. But that's where you put that kind of capability if you had it. Okay, so that's a little bit about the CV. Briefly, before we get into LinkedIn, and then we'll be done, as I'm just conscious of time now, what you should have gathered already is enough information to think about your own CV first of all and reflect on whether you are actually building a business case. So that's, as I said to you earlier, the most important thing about this evening, if you only take away one message, is make sure that you're sending out to your target audience a strong business case as to why on earth they should be considering interviewing you. If you're not doing that, it's probably because you're not providing relevant evidence of your actual success and abilities. And the clues behind all of this, remember that acid test, is that if you're not getting the interviews you deserve or not enough of them, I can virtually guarantee, I can't always guarantee 100%, but I say 99.9% of the time, the CV is the problem. And if you sort that out, you'll be surprised at the change it will bring. If you're getting 7, 8, 9 interviews out of every 10 applications, you probably should have gone and had your tea by now, because it's happy days, really. Why bother changing it? I couldn't honestly say to you, we will massively improve on that, because there's not much to massively improve upon. But most people aren't in that situation. Most people are struggling trying to get the interviews they think they should be getting, and nobody tells them why. And I have to say, it's down to the CV and the message you're sending out. And you can change that. So surely option 1 isn't a valid option unless you're getting lots of interviews. And if you're getting lots of interviews, you don't need to do anything. If you're not getting lots of interviews, you need to do something, and you either need to fix it yourself or get help. And if you're interested in that option, or you're beginning to think maybe that's a valid option, one of the benefits of having endured me for the last hour and a bit is that shortly I'll show you some discounts off our services, which are pretty hefty, and we offer them to anybody who attends our webinars as a sort of reward. So I'll come on to that very shortly. But first, let's talk about the process linking behind, linking to what we do if you are interested in that, very briefly, and then I'll move on to LinkedIn. So if you think, yeah, I'm fed up, I don't service my own car, I don't landscape my own garden, I don't fix my own plumbing, therefore I'm not going to write my own CV if I need to improve it, then yes, we can help. We don't amend people's CVs. We're not in the business of tweaking them. It's not technically possible to do that. You've either got an effective CV right now, or it's not working, or not as effective as it should be. The only way to fix it is to start from the ground up and rewrite the whole thing. ditto LinkedIn profile. If we do that, we have a session with you over the phone or Skype for a couple of hours, and we extract from you in the nicest possible way all the information we need working with you to achieve that. So therefore, we can help you clarify whether the objective you have is sane in the first place. You know, where you're heading, is that the right direction? Is it appropriate? If you don't know what your value proposition is, we talked about that earlier, we'll work that out for you, with you, and help you. We can then also work out where your real achievements and the most relevant achievements have been, prioritize them, and then write them up in the STAR format that I showed you. So that the bottom line is we can build that business case for you. And if we build a business case for you, the one thing I can guarantee is you'll get more interviews as a consequence. So we don't write CVs for people who are trying to be a nuclear submarine captain when they've not actually been trained to do so. So we wouldn't take that on, obviously. But if we like what you're saying about your career objective and you're just not having much success, we can rewrite the CV and the LinkedIn profile, build a stronger business case. That will get you more interviews, and it will get you interviews to better jobs as well. You can actually just leverage your salary level upwards by being able to apply for and securing interviews for more senior jobs within reason. Then you can do the maths, therefore, to coin a current car advertising phrase in the UK at least. You do the maths, you can work out whether that's worth investing some money in or not, as the case may be. If you get a job quicker, what's that worth to you? If you get a better job with better salary or hourly rate, what's that worth to you? Pause on that for a little while whilst we talk about LinkedIn. And briefly, we'll just talk about this. There's a few pointers. This is not a technical guide to LinkedIn, what you should do, because that's not important. If you want to make LinkedIn work for you, if you're on it or considering being on it, it's all about the content again, the message you're sending to people. Now, remember earlier I said to you that the vast majority of recruiters and hiring managers can only judge you based on the CV content that you've sent them. So if your CV is bad, you'll appear bad to your audience. If your CV is good, you'll probably get interviews. Whatever that situation is, the next thing most recruiters will do, the vast majority of that vast majority, is they'll go straight to LinkedIn. Probably, in fairness, they'll go to other social media as well, but LinkedIn certainly they'll go to, and they'll check you out. So you need to make sure that you don't have any disconnects or any conflicts of information, because if you do, you might have passed the hurdle with the CV and then get rejected because your LinkedIn profile says something different or causes more concerns. Bottom line is, our view, we're not saying you should be on LinkedIn if you don't want to be. That's not the issue. But our view is that if you're interested in gaining new opportunities, building your career, getting a profile, making it easier for people to spot you and your abilities, LinkedIn's a good place to be. It's a good mechanic for doing that. It's really important now in the marketplace. LinkedIn places or is responsible for finding more candidates for jobs than Monster now. It's that big. They earn more revenues as a result of recruitment activities than anything else that they do, and it's all heading in that general direction. So it's a good place to be if you want to gain more visibility. However, it isn't, which is where most people tend to go wrong, it isn't a place to dump your CV and then sit back and hope that it all works for you. It's not to say that wouldn't work for you, it's just not a very effective tool. And of course, if you've got a bad CV and you just dump it into LinkedIn, you're just replicating that badness. So, content is the key. What you put in LinkedIn and the qualitative side of things is more important than the quantitative side. If you know LinkedIn, I won't go into the detail now, but if you know LinkedIn, you'll know that it scores your profile and it will encourage you to populate it with more and more information in the belief that your profile is somehow better. And that's just not true. You'll get a higher score from LinkedIn's built-in scoring mechanism. Yes, that is true, but that doesn't mean to say you're more attractive to recruiters or employers. So to highlight that example, if you add a photograph to LinkedIn, you will get a slightly higher score on your profile. Unfortunately, if you add a photograph of a monkey on your LinkedIn profile, you'll still get a slightly higher score. But guess what recruiters and employers will think when they hit your profile? So it is about the content and the quality of the content, not the amount of information you hurl in its general direction. The key areas. So just as the CV has 3 key areas to look out for, I'd argue LinkedIn has 3 key areas. They're just slightly different or called different things. First one of those, professional headline, is the bit of text that appears under your name. You can change that. By default, LinkedIn populates it with your job title and current employer. That's not the most helpful piece of information, particularly if you work for an odd company or somebody that nobody's ever heard of, or if you've got an odd job title. So don't go with the default setting, however helpful you think it might be, and don't stick things in like desperately looking, available now, immediately available, can start immediately. That's not particularly compelling. I'll come on to that in a minute into where it is and how you change it. The second area that's important is the summary, which I'll show you in conjunction with the professional headline. And the summary is the piece of text that appears under the header where your photo, your name, and your professional headline is. Here's Matt's example to keep it consistent. So this is Matt's profile as viewed when you are able to take a proper view of his profile. It's named obviously there. The professional headline is a bit just under his name. So by default, that would say Managing Director, CVIA Group Limited. Wholly meaningless other than the Managing Director bit. Doesn't explain who on earth CVIA Limited are. Nobody will have heard of it, or very few people have heard of it. So what he's done is explain the value he can bring, his value proposition. And that is, the key bit is driving success in the job market. A lot more appealing. Small change, big difference in impression. If you've got a really odd job title and you're working for a business that nobody's ever heard of, all you're doing is creating an image in somebody's mind. As soon as they see your profile, it's the first thing they'll see. They'll think, what the hell does this mean? Or if you're working in a job that has a job title that appears to be too junior or possibly too senior, you're automatically pigeonholing yourself. The summary is the bit of text underneath, as you can see. It's similar to the professional summary on a CV, but not identical. Again, I don't have time to go into the detail of that. That's not the purpose, but it's broadly that what am I, what's my value proposition, what am I good at, linking that to hot skills in the marketplace. Written in a different tense as well, interestingly, written in the first person makes a difference. CV, third person, LinkedIn, first person. Although it's important, it isn't the third most important bit of the LinkedIn profile. You need to put your jobs in. You don't need to put all your jobs necessarily. You're not obliged, as you might be on a CV, to complete everything on LinkedIn. So only put stuff that's relevant and recent, and only put summaries. Don't go into loads of detail. Nowhere near as much detail as you'd have on your CV. And then the third area that's really important that most people don't know, don't use, and a lot of people don't even know exists, is called projects. And projects is an area in LinkedIn. If you go and edit your profile, much like my profile now is on screen in edit mode, on the right-hand side, there's normally some choices. Where exactly it is depends on how advanced your own profile is, how much information you've submitted. But somewhere down that right-hand side, there'll be a section called projects, which I've highlighted on the screen. You click on that, and you get a screen a bit like this. You give the project a name. The projects are the career highlights, if you like, from the CV, and these can be dumped in from your CV without any change. They work really well. The only thing is you need to give your project a name. You have to, you're forced to. So with Matt's example, remember it was Enterprise Rent-A-Car, and we talked about how Matt talked about how he had turned around a business. So your name could be something punchy, a nice headline like dramatic, this is a bit dramatic, but dramatic business turnaround, or successful business turnaround, or dramatic increase in business profitability. Something that will grab the eye, not too Sun-like or tabloid, but not far off it. You can link the projects to a particular occupation. So in Matt's case, it would be his Enterprise Rent-A-Car spell 95 through 99. If you wanted to, you could date it, but you don't have to. And then you provide a description. So that would be the STAR methodology text that we looked at, dumped straight into this box highlighted on the screen right now. Then you save it, and you've got a nice project that appears on your profile, example, a testimonial evidence of what you're about. Final comment regarding LinkedIn. The sections as they appear by default aren't bad. It's better to have them well populated than not have a profile at all, but by default the setting isn't the ideal. So you can reorder all the sections. They're drag and drop. So you can grab hold of the sections, reposition them, and then your profile looks better and more effective. When we write these for our clients, that's what we do. We not only adjust the content, but of course we make sure the profile is reset and relayed in a more effective way. So the business case again comes across really well. Okay, I promised you a special offer and then we're done, and I'll move on to questions. The special offer is this. Ordinarily, I'm afraid if you do consider getting professional help, much like anything else, it costs money. So that bit's unavoidable. How much money at least is not so painful given these special offers. So if you're in the camp that's thinking, yeah, need help, can't be bothered or not inclined or don't wish to have a go at it myself, I need to seek professional guidance. Ordinarily, for anybody with more than 7 years work experience, if you've got less than 7 years work experience, you need to speak to us separately. But anybody with more than 7 years work experience, to write your CV and your LinkedIn profile from scratch costs $349 plus VAT. So it's not an inexpensive pursuit, I'm afraid, but it takes a lot of time. It takes about a day, including the consultation and our writing time, to do everything. But for a limited period of time, we'll provide you with both those services. So complete rewrite of your CV, complete rewrite of your LinkedIn profile to match the 275 plus VAT. So you're saving 90 quid. That offer's available until close of play Monday the 7th. That's next Monday. So that's the only downside in terms of the offer, is that it's time limited, obviously for a reason, but enough time for you to think about it. You need to go visit that website link that's on the screen now, which I'm going to copy and paste into the chat room facility, just so that you can grab it, because I don't think you can click it on the screen. So I'm just pasting that in a couple of places so you can grab it and click on it if you're interested. There's an added benefit if you're amongst the first 10 that order that particular deal. As long as it's by close of play Monday, if you're amongst the first 10 that do it, we'll also add a free cover letter and access to our automated interview coaching system, which is a really clever piece of kit. So for the next stage, when you get more interviews and you want to practice them, this piece of kit allows you in your own home, as long as you've got a webcam, to practice interviewing without anybody peering over your shoulder. A really interesting piece of kit. So we'll give access to that plus a cover letter, which that's worth 95 quid, as well as the CV profile and the LinkedIn rewrite. And then finally, on the web page that you can go to, if you just fancy doing something yourself, we've got a very cheap 18 quid, including the VAT pack, which will give you some sort of DIY templates and what have you, so you can put a toe in the water if you're not committed to going the whole hog. So that's it. Appreciate your time. We've overrun a bit, for which I apologise, but I hope you got something out of that and found it useful. I promised I'd deal with the questions, so I'm just going to open that pane up now. If you've got any more questions that you'd like to ask, please just rattle them into the facility. But if you need to disappear and get on with something else in your lives, then thank you very much for your time. I hope you got something out of that and found it useful. I wish you the best of luck going forwards, but please, two big messages. Make sure you're going to market with a business case, and if you're struggling with that, do something, please, because it really is heartbreaking sometimes to hear these people who've been banging their head against a brick wall for a number of months or even years, only for the sake of nobody hadn't had the guts to tell them that their CVs were rubbish or inappropriate or ineffective. You now know, you have the stats, you can work that out for yourself, then you can decide whether you need to do something or not. So, end of the sermon. Just bear with me. The line's going to go dead for 2-3 seconds whilst I switch to question mode. Now I'll come back and answer all your questions. So we'll be back with you in literally 2 seconds, partly of which I need to grab myself some lubrication because my throat's about to pack up. So literally bear with me a few moments. I'll gulp something down and then be back with you. Right, I'm back. I hope so. I'm just going to move on to question phase. Just bear with me one moment whilst I